just saw me cut out the rough circle for the base using the bandsaw, which was easy to do. I cut it, a 1/16 or so oversized, because later on what I'm going to do, I'm going to come in with a router on a trammel point so I can route a perfect circle. This top is a little too big for me to get on the bandsaw, so I've got my jigsaw with an upcutting blade. This is the bottom. I'm going to cut a little oversized, maybe a little more than I did with the bandsaw, because the jigsaw is not quite as accurate, and that'll make it so I can go ahead and then route. I've made a device here that I can use to make the circle perfect. It's simply a piece of MDF with a 3/8 inch hole drilled in it, and a 1 3/8 inch hole drilled at the exact point that it needs to be, such that I can take my router with a 3/8 inch bit and a 1 3/8 inch bushing and fit it into the hole and then run it around the circle. Now, it's a big dusty operation, and normally I would like to be able to hook up a dust collector, but that hose and so forth would really hurt my ability to feel this. I need to feel this router as it goes around, make sure it's not tilting into the work, and so it makes a perfect circle. So instead, I've got a big box fan in the window, blowing air out, another window across the room, letting air in. I'm hoping that breeze will just take everything and put it outside for me. Got one point here where I've got a flat in the work, and I can put my router in and have it turn freely, so that's where I can start my cut. And of course, I'm taking this in stages. I'm taking small bites at a time. This will be 3 or 4 bites before I get all the way through it. Here I'm making the banding for the lower platform, and I went through a couple of thought processes on how to do this. One idea was to take bent laminations and make them thin enough to go around and build them up. It would have been difficult to get the joints to match. I understood that. Another possibility was steam bending, although this is a fairly tight radius for a piece that's going to be 1 inch thick. What I finally settled on was to do a Cooper joint, where we have 6 joints on boards, each at 30 degrees cuts, so that makes a total of 60-degree angle. 6 of those goes around the whole 360 degrees, and that seemed to work. So I took a piece of the lumber from the tree that my client had taken down, and picked out a piece where I could get some good continuous grain pattern, and then cut lengths, put 30-degree miters on each end, and right now they're clamped together with a band clamp, and laid my veneered substrate on there and lined up all the veneer joints with the joints on here, drew the circle, and now I have a good idea what this is going to look like. It gives me my 1 inch, actually I've got more than 1 inch, I've got about 1 inch and 5/16 at the narrowest. So what I'm going to do now is do some joinery on these miters. Probably use a small domino, put my domino machine on, make a cut, so that I have a good tenon at each joint, since end grain just does not glue well. So I'll have a good tenon at each joint, and then Once I'm done with that, I can go ahead and actually cut out the outline with each individual piece, and using a drum sander get the the cut right up to the line. And once I'm real happy with the fit, then I can go ahead and think about the glue up and how I will strengthen these joints along the inside of the substrate. So that's what's coming, and stand by and we'll go through all that. I'm using the smallest domino to hold these sections together. It's the 5mm by 30mm, and it's about 3/4 of an inch wide, and it'll fit in here. I've made a mark such that there's a good 1/4 inch of meat outside where the mortise is going to be, but on the inside the domino just about comes up to where the substrate's going to be glued on. So you know, it'll give me good strength, and won't pop out here on the outside. So I've got the domino cutter set up to my line. Get it seated nice and good. That gives me a nice little mortise. Domino sits in there very nicely, and it'll give good strength to this annulus. And now I'll cut to this line. Stay a little bit inside the line, and then I can clean that up with the drum sander. I've got my auxiliary table on here because I think I'll be using it later to cut the outside circumference. Time to show you how close you can actually bandsaw to the line. You can see the line here, you can see my cut coming right up to that line. You can actually see coming right up to it. And the way this is done is to actually use the back of the bandsaw blade as a guide. It's a technique I learned from Michael Fortune. And back So it's probably going to be hard to explain on a video, but you can think about trying to push the block just sideways slightly so that the meat that you just cut is bearing against the back of the blade. And that back of the blade then becomes a guide. And it's pretty easy just to do a little bit of push one way or the other to slightly cause the blade to stay under the line. I find it very effective to sand right up to the line. Now you can see what your plan is. The domino comes almost up to the edge. It's enough where I'll get a lot of good glue surface. And I was able to cut almost to the line. I can just see the pencil lead. Come back and just clean that up, smooth it up with a drum sander very lightly so that it will fit nicely against the side of the substrate. I'm using a big drum on my oscillating spindle sander to smooth out the bandsaw marks. And I had marked the circumference with a marking knife, and what happens when I get very close right up to where I'm supposed to be sanding, a little bit of a knife edge of wood peels off, which is that very last bit that remained when the marking knife made the groove. And so that's a real good indicator that I'm where I need to be with the sanding, and I can go ahead and move on to the next piece. using Titebond 3 on this glue up for a couple reasons. One is it has a little longer open time, and the other is that it dries with a darker glue line than the original Titebond. And considering I'm gluing up against a walnut, a little darker glue line is a good thing. Here's the final glue up. I used the band to get everything set, but I'm using regular bar clamps to draw in, give me good contact with the substrate. Just saw was me starting to cut manually, following a line, but as soon as I got cut into the line, I went ahead and installed a dowel point in the guide hole I had made, and then I simply put the blade back in the kerf and then pushed down, had the dowel point embed itself slightly into my MDF table, and at that point on I could use that as a pivot point, and I just pivoted and cut all the way around, made a nice even cut. Well, I've glued 6 border sections to the tabletop in the same way that I did on the base, and now I'm cutting the outline, but because the top is so large I can't use the bandsaw like I did for the base, so I've set my jigsaw. I went ahead and marked the circumference using the same jig that I will use with the router, and I'm just cutting just slightly outside that line. I'm using my router in this swinging arm that I made, where I can pivot around the center point. I'm doing a climb cut with a 3/8" straight bit. A climb cut means that the bit is rotating this way, and it wants to try to feed itself into the work. So you've got to kind of hold the router back. The reason I'm using a climb cut is there's much less, actually no tendency to chip out a big piece of the work. If I was using a normal cut, I'd be feeding into the wood, and there'd be points here where there'd be a real tendency for the bit to take a chunk of wood and just rip it out, give me a big gouge, a big piece of missing. So I'm doing the climb cut, and I'm doing it in very shallow passes. I'm on my second pass. You can see 2 passes, not even a third of the way through. So it takes time, but it gives you a good finish. Now I'm using my router with a straight bit and my pivot point here. Go ahead and just clean up the edge here, make it nice and smooth, because later what I'm going to do is I'm going to glue some banding to that. So I've got this so that it's barely kissing the surface, and it'll make a nice smooth surface cut for me. And with the edge routed, I'll just clean it up, make it ready for gluing. I'm using a little 220 sandpaper on a very flat plywood block. And just very carefully going over the surface to get rid of any tool marks, that sort of thing. Now, in order to make the edge banding for the base, I've taken some of the same wood that I used to make the segments of the base, and I'm going to rip a couple strips that I can then book match lengthwise to go all the way around, and I'll glue it all the way around in place. And the final thickness will probably be about 1/8 of an inch. I'll use the horizontal drum sander to thickness these pieces and get them nice and smooth. So I got these strips down to about 1/8 of an inch. It's maybe slightly less. The important thing is they have to be thin enough to be able to bend around the form here, and I'll be using a strap clamp to bring them in tight. Now the difficult part now is getting them to the right length, because I want to book match them so each one of them has to be exactly half the circumference. So it's a little trial and error. First I'll square up one end on the radial arm saw with a nice piece of masonite underneath so I don't get any tear out, and then I'll calculate the length, cut it a little oversized, and then slowly fit it on in, taking it to the saw as necessary until I get the fit just right, and then we'll go ahead and glue it up using all 3 of my hands. Yeah, spread glue on the surfaces, and now this really takes about 3 hands to do. I basically have a block clamped to the table. I've made a mark where the joint should go. I've got the work supported on some shelves. Got my band clamp ready to go. I need to get my band clamp down between the block and the work. And then I put this little guide dowel in the center that I've been using. And I'll just use that to pinch the work against the clamp and the block. And that lets me bring the work around. Get it into place. At that point I can take some slack out of the clamp. Get it to grab. Take this off. Pull this away. I want to get the clamp in a position where it's not at the joint. Slide that around just a little bit. Then I want to get the work up the centered on the substrate, the band centered on the work. Start bringing it home. Well, I've banded the outside edge of the top with walnut, the same technique I used on the base, and the walnut's a little proud, both on the banding and on the segments here. So I'm simply going to plane them down. I'll use a block plane to take this edge off of the banding, and then I'll use a smooth plane to plane down the segments even with the fiddleback maple. Well, it's much easier cleaning up this edge on the small base because I can just hold it to the table here. I'm just going to use a 1/8 inch round over bit, 1/8 inch radius round over bit in the small router to just give me a little bit of relief on the edge so it's not so sharp.